All right, welcome to our third video in our 13 Original Colonies region focus notes. Today we are going to be talking about the Southern Colonies. Get my lightsaber out. The Southern Colonies, and today our language objective is, I can explain the differences between the regions of colonial America using a graphic organizer, a video guide, and a color-coded map. So let's just go ahead and get started. The things that you are going to need today are, like usual, the graphic organizer that I have given you and should be in your binder, as well as your 13 colonies map. Also should be in your binder already set up. You can see that we are taking notes in our last column, or the furthest to the right, the Southern Colonies section. All right, I'll get my highlighter out, and then let's go ahead and find whatever color you would like to use that you haven't already used yet. I'm going to use blue. As you can see, this whole presentation is blue for the Southern Colonies. So let's go ahead and start by outlining and including our map. So we are going to want to include Virginia, right here, as well as Maryland, which is right up here. And I'm going to try not to catch Delaware, as Delaware was part of the middle colonies. All right, so there's Virginia and Maryland, and I would also like to color in North and South Carolina and Georgia, so basically everything else that's left. I know I don't get all the way down to Georgia. My map is kind of obscured by some buttons, but yours is not, so you'll be able to get all the way in there. So coloring it in nicely, better than mine. Again, not a nice stylus, cheap little stylus. Okay, so coloring it in as best as you can to get all of those southern colonies in there. All right, so there we go. Those are our southern colonies, the ones we will be talking about today. As you can see, just in terms of size, these have the most land. It almost looks like it's like half of what we see in the rest of the colonies. So let's go ahead and start taking notes. So the first thing we want to talk about is the geography and climate. Okay. The geography and climate, remember, these don't go in order. They're not in order on that graphic organizer. So first things first, geography and climate. In the southern colonies, it was very hot and humid. So if you've ever walked outside and felt your hair get kind of puffy, you just feel that like wetness in the air, that humidity. What that meant though was that it was good for farming. Okay. That hot and humid climate is really good for farming. Outside of farming, they did have ports for trading, but they also had flat land, which helped them farm as well. So flat land, again, helped them farm, but then they had ports for trade. And a port is basically just like a little city or a little place, which I'll use my pointer. Okay. It's just any little city or little nook or cranny in here that a boat could come in and stop at. So it's not something that's right on the edge of the ocean that the waves are going to keep hitting it, but you could actually like come into one of these little areas and you could dock your boat. So those are ports. Next up, we should talk about the economy. Okay. I don't know if I gave myself enough room here, so I'm just going to go ahead and move mine up a little. There we go. So the southern colonies, we were very, very focused on farming, right? We just said that that made sense based on their climate. Okay? And specifically, they were farming tobacco and rice. Okay, so they were farming tobacco and rice. Sorry if that was a little jumpy. Something popped up on my end that I was not planning for. Okay. This tobacco and rice, they farmed them as what were called cash crops. Cash spelled that wrong. Crops. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means here in a second. Okay. Also, the economy in the South relied on large plantations. To farm faster. It let them farm more, it let them farm faster. And then in order to staff these large plantations, which again, that's another word we're going to talk about here in a second. I'll highlight the two words that I was just talking about, cash crops and plantations. Oh, strange. Okay. Cash crops and plantations, but in order to get these large plantations to work, they needed things people called indentured servants or slaves. That was really the key to them being able to farm like they did in the South. An indentured servant is someone who typically owes someone money, and the way that they're going to pay off their debt or the money that they owe is through working for them. So it's somebody who has owned someone a lot of money, they're left to pay that money back, so they do it by working for them. And then slaves we've heard of before. Those are people who are taken without their consent and forced to work with little to no pay, and in the case of the United States, typically treated very poorly. So with farming being such a big deal, I just wanted to point out on our map as you finish writing, we see a lot of rice down along the coast. We see tobacco up here kind of in the middle. We also have things like a little bit of cattle going on there. We have these purple triangles, and I wanted to point these purple triangles out to you. These purple triangles are indigo. Indigo is what actually makes your blue jeans blue. So it's a blue dye, what's a plant that we actually take the blue from, or that dark purple color, and we use it to dye our clothing. So that's part of why we have things like blue jeans. It is dyed from the indigo. All right, remember you can pause me at any time if I'm talking too quickly, or if you need a break, you can always pause and come back. Okay, so let's talk about cash crops. So a cash crop is a crop that is designed Actually, you know what? I think I'm just going to type it out. It is a crop designed to be sold rather than eaten. So a lot of farming up to this point was designed to be eaten. These are crops that are meant to be sold. If I could just change my font size here, make it a little smaller. What I am going to encourage you to do is at the very top bottom of your graphic organizer where there's some space, or on the back or along the side, please write down the word cash crops. We're going to do the same with plantations as well, and write down this definition. So they are crops designed to be sold rather than eaten. So the whole purpose of growing them is knowing that they are going to be sold for money rather than being eaten. If you think about states like Wisconsin, right, we have a lot of growing of corns and soybean, especially here in the Midwest in general. But these sorts of things aren't just for us to eat, right? Like they're for the cattle to eat. They're things we make different fuels out of. We make different parts of other foods for it. They're meant to be sold to other people, not just eaten straight by that farmer's family. So again, jot this down off to the side somewhere so that you have it. And then let's talk about plantations. Plantations, again, find a spot to write this down off to the side somewhere. Plantations are large farms owned by one person large farms owned by one person to produce or to make cash crops. So they are designed to be owned by one person in charge, and they're designed to grow those cash crops, designed to make money, and lots of people working them. So you can see in the picture here, we have the people who seem to be in charge, these white people right here. They would be considered like the owners of the plantation. This whole area is theirs, and they are using indentured servants or slaves to run their plantation in order to make those crops to sell. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump back to our colonies now. All right, so we need to talk about what types of settlers we have. Guess what? Shortest box you're gonna write all day. Okay. The types of settlers that settled here, we're ready. Mostly English. Okay, so they were mostly English people who settled here in the South and the Southern colonies. What that meant for religious groups then, move this up a little. In terms of religious groups, we had the Anglicans, and that meant Church of England. Anglican, the Church of England. And then there were some of a few other types, like Roman Catholic, like Protestant, and like Baptist. Sorry, my S's get harder and harder to write the more I write them. So we had a few different religious groups settling here, but predominantly English people were the people who came. Pause me if you need. I'm going to go ahead and start talking about government. This is a box where you might want to write a little bit smaller, not super small. We've had more for sure. But the government in the Southern colonies, specifically we're going to talk about one state. We're going to talk about Virginia. And we're going to talk about what's called the House of Burgesses. In case you didn't know, I am currently at school by the sound of that lovely bell. So in the House of Burgesses, what this was two people were representative for every area. Every area of Virginia had two representatives that got to have a say in the government. So two representatives got a say. And then the governor, which was like the highest up that you went, got the power of veto. And what that basically means is the governor can say no to whatever the people wanted to do. That was the power of the governor. They could come back and people were like, hey, I think we need to do this. And the governor could say, nope, not gonna happen. And then it wouldn't happen. All right, when you're ready, let's go ahead and let's talk about the interactions with the Native Americans. So there were a few Native American groups in this area. We had the Powhatan. We had the Powhatan, we had the Choctaw. Did I spell that wrong? Oops. Choctaw, the Creek, and the Yamakra. Okay. In the South, we learned about the North and the Middle colonies, or the New England and the Middle colonies. We had a pretty good, even balance. Most were friendly. In the South, battles were very, very frequent. They happened often. And what typically happened is that Native American tribes, I'm going to abbreviate NA here. If you want to abbreviate, go ahead. Native Americans were caught between the European settlers. So basically, when the European countries would fight, or have a conflict, when the European countries would fight or have a conflict, what would end up happening is the Native American tribes would be caught in the middle of it. So it did not lead to very strong or very good relations with the Native Americans in the southern colonies. Okay. Last box. And here we are at the last box with key people and places. Just like before, we'll start with places. Okay. The first one I wanted to talk about is, actually the only one I want to talk about, is Jamestown. Jamestown was the first successful colony. There was a colony before that, and we're going to talk about that a little later, but it was the first successful one. So then some people that you're going to need to know, or in this case, one person and one company, is the Virginia Company. We'll start with that. The Virginia Company, okay, was the one that founded Jamestown. They were the ones that founded Jamestown. And the other person we're going to write down, his name is George, funny last name, Oglethorpe. George Oglethorpe, and he founded Georgia. I abbreviated my Georgia to GA. If you don't know state abbreviations, please use the actual written out form of Georgia right there. But those are our key people and places in the southern colonies. If you haven't already done so, go ahead and look back at the other two videos on the New England or northern colonies and the middle colonies. And I am getting excited for us to bring this information into practice in the class.